How are you?
Good. I wasn't sure if I could come in earlier. I was just a little nervous about the timing.
Totally fine. You're fine. No problem at all. I see you went live, so that's good. I'm just going to introduce you and turn it right over to you.
Okay, so can we just double check about sharing because I
Yeah.
just tried sharing and my thing wouldn't come up. So I'll just click it again and go to the window. My presentation is right here.
Okay.
Share. Oh, good. It works.
There
Okay.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So I would like to introduce Brenda Davis. Brenda Davis is a registered dietitian, author, speaker, and plant-based pioneer. So on the heels of the amazing talks we've had thus far, I know the audience is excited to hear what you have to share as well. I'm grateful for your participation. Once again, I just want to thank um, uh, Zhang Lai and Mei Lu for their sort of their pioneering this event. It's been tremendously educational on a lot of different levels, a lot of engagement, and I'm excited to hear your presentation. So now that you figured out how to load it up, let's rock and roll.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. Can everybody see it now?
No, you took it off. You stopped sharing it, so you have to
I
share it.
did? Okay.
That's all right.
Let's see if I can just, okay. Okay, sorry about that. Now I'll go back to share screen.
All right.
Okay.
When it's up.
Now it's not coming up.
Did you close the PowerPoint?
No, I didn't. It's
Okay.
still here.
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay. Share screen at the lower left.
Okay.
Window.
It's going around in circles.
Still?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I just saw it a few minutes ago, and then it went away, so I thought you had stopped sharing.
Yeah, there's an hourglass going around in circles on the share thing.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a little nervous now about
All right.
it
Don't be
coming up.
nervous. We're good. We're good. What
Okay.
I would recommend, sometimes this literally solves all the problems. Hit the little red door, come right back into the room, and then we'll reload it.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Try that. The lower
Okay.
left-hand corner, the little red door. You'll go out to the dashboard, then you'll come back in. It'll say join, and then we'll try to load it from there. I think something got maybe caught on your side.
Okay, so I should stop streaming?
No, don't hit that. Don't hit stop streaming because then they won't see us. In the little lower left-hand corner, the little
Yeah.
red door,
It says leave?
yeah, leave and then come back in, and then we'll go through it again. We'll get through it. True, Ellie. I think there was a lot of clicking going on, but we're good. We'll get her on board.
Okay.
Okay, good. Right now, lower left-hand corner, the little monitor.
Yeah.
Yep, click that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's not coming up.
Is the presentation in the window or it's not in the window?
Okay, that's what I'm going to try. I'll see if I move it to a different part of the second part of my computer. Oh, there it is. Okay. I had to move it to screen number 2.
Gotcha. Okay. I knew we'd figure it out.
Okay. Now can you see it?
Not yet. Did you hit the blue share button?
Okay, just a second. I'll just end show. Okay, so now I'll share. Okay. Share. Oh. Okay.
Good.
Now I'll go from beginning.
Yeah. Perfect.
Now.
Take it away, Brenda.
Oh, thank you. Yay. Okay, so this afternoon or this morning for me, I'm going to be talking about plant-based diets in the treatment and remission of type 2 diabetes. and I'm very happy to be here and to be a part of this wonderful event. First, a brief overview. I'm going to begin by addressing the question, can type 2 diabetes be driven into remission? Then I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience with diabetes research in the Marshall Islands. Then I'll share a personal case study, and we will spend most of our time talking about a dietary protocol that optimizes plant-based diets for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. So first, to the question, can type 2 diabetes be driven into remission? And the answer is yes, absolutely it can. There was a consensus statement that appeared in 4 of the most prestigious diabetes journals between 2021 and 22, and you can see the journals listed below. The groups that were part of this consensus statement were the American Diabetes Association, the Endocrine Society, the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, and Diabetes UK. They define type 2 diabetes remission as having an A1C of less than 6.5% measured at least 3 months after the cessation of glucose-lowering medications. Now, there was another expert consensus statement from ACLM, which included experts from a wide variety of organizations, and they addressed the dietary interventions to treat type 2 diabetes. And the panel reached consensus that the diet that is most effective in achieving remission emphasizes whole plant-based foods and unrefined carbohydrate sources, and minimizes ultra-processed foods, meat, and other animal products. Now, moving on to my personal experience with research on diabetes in the Marshall Islands. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Marshall Islands, they're about halfway between Hawaii and Australia, in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean, just north of about 5 to 7 degrees north of the equator. You can see they're very, very remote. Marshall Islands declared a state of emergency where diabetes is concerned. The Marshallese have among the highest prevalence of diabetes and the highest death rates from diabetes globally. In 2021, the prevalence was 25.1% for those ages 20 to 79 years, and that was down from over 30% in previous years. About half of all surgeries on the islands are actually amputations due to diabetes. You might be wondering, was diabetes always a problem? Was it a problem in the past? Well, a century ago, diabetes was pretty much unheard of in the Marshall Islands. People were very slim, they were physically active, and they lived off the land. So their traditional diet was essentially whatever they could pick off of the islands, coconut and breadfruit and pandanus and bananas and paley leaves, and whatever they could catch from the ocean, fish and seafood. What do they eat today? Well, today their diet is based on a lot of fatty and highly processed meats. You can see the celebration meal in the bottom left, turkey tails, which are very high fat turkey meal. And they eat the meat with a sticky white rice and other refined white flour products like biscuits and bread and donuts. And they consume a lot of added sugars. This little girl in the left is actually, this is about 6:30 in the morning. This is breakfast, a can of Pepsi and a popsicle. And they wash it all down with the beverage called luau. And the first ingredient in luau is high fructose corn syrup. So, you can see it'd be hard to design a diet to induce diabetes more effectively than the diet that the Marshallese have unfortunately adopted. So I went in with a team of researchers to do, basically we did a program, a lifestyle intervention program using 5 overlapping cohorts with a control group who received the conventional diabetes treatment. And people who were part of the intervention group experienced 3 months of lifestyle medicine, and we put a lot of emphasis on this intervention in a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet and exercise. And of course, we included all of the other aspects of lifestyle medicine, sleep and stress management and addiction control and community support and so forth. And I don't have a lot of time, so I won't go into the details of the intervention, but I do want to share some of the results. We saw an average fasting blood glucose drop of 71 milligrams per deciliter at 2 weeks. And we also saw some drop in the control because a lot of the control participants were trying on their own to do what the intervention group was doing. That's one of the challenges of being in a very small population. That news travels quickly. And then at 12 weeks, we had a drop of almost 50 points or 50 milligrams per deciliter in blood glucose in the intervention group and 14 in the control. A1C went down by almost 2 points in the intervention and about 0.6 of a point in the control. The high sensitivity CRP dropped 1.2 points in the intervention and just 0.1 point in the control. And of course, that's our measure of inflammation. And remission we actually achieved in quite a good number of the participants, probably close to a third of our participants. Participants experienced less pain, less disability, clearer thinking, better sleep, less constipation when on the program. And I often think about these people as pioneers of the Pacific because participants in these interventions provided hope in the Marshall Islands amidst a very deep sense of hopelessness where diabetes was concerned. They proved that diabetes can be defeated with healthy food and exercise. They succeeded despite the poor quality of their produce and the lack of resources. They persevered amidst mountains of spam, ramen, fried chicken, and sticky rice. And they managed with few gyms and no walking trails. And many people ask me, do I think that this type of program could work at home? And my answer is, if there is hope in the Marshall Islands, given the enormous barriers that they face, there's got to be hope at home. But the hope rests with the integration of lifestyle medicine into our healthcare system. It's got to be offered as a treatment option. And when it is, the results are often stunning, like they were for my case study, Carlos. Carlos was a client of mine, and he was diagnosed with a type 2 diabetes in 1993. He had severe cardiovascular disease, and he had one serious myocardial infarction the year before we started the lifestyle medicine therapy. He had hypertension, he had high cholesterol, peripheral artery disease, he was in early stage renal failure, and he had chronic recurring gout 6 or 7 times a year. His prognosis wasn't good. He was told that he had progressive irreversible diseases and he needed to get his affairs in order. His daily treatment was 17 pills and 35 to 40 units of insulin. After less than 1 year on a whole food plant-based diet and exercise and lifestyle medicine, Carlos was taking 0 insulin and 0 pills. And here are his lab results after 1 year on this program. His fasting glucose was 80 to 87 milligrams per deciliter, A1C 5.1, blood pressure 115/70, which he was never able to achieve prior, even on 2 medications for blood pressure. And remember that all of these numbers were achieved with 0 medications. His arteries opened up without surgery, peripheral artery disease disappeared, his kidney function normalized, and he had not one single further recurrence of gout. And 10 years later, Carlos was still free of these conditions and medications used for these conditions. And just to give you an indication of the kind of changes we saw, here are his coronary artery disease reports from 2005 and then 2017 after the intervention. So in 2005, you can see he had an inferior wall infarct with superimposed ischemia, inferior wall hypokinesis, reduced ejection fraction of about 50%. In 2017, no evidence of abnormal cardiac activity, no evidence of ischemia, normal chamber size, normal ejection fraction of 61%. And the moral of the story is this is what is possible. And I know not everyone is willing to make the necessary lifestyle changes, and not everyone will respond as robustly as Carlos did. But I believe that everyone has a right to know that lifestyle changes are a safe and highly effective treatment option. So why are plant-based diets so effective? Well, plant-based diets are effective because they get to the root causes of type 2 diabetes and effectively put a lid on the drivers of these diseases. Drivers like glycotoxicity and inflammation, oxidative stress and lipotoxicity, and of course, dysbiosis. The most effective dietary patterns minimize pathogenic dietary components and maximize protective dietary components. The most protective factors being fiber and phytochemicals and plant enzymes that help to convert phytochemicals into their bioactive metabolites, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, plant sterols and stanols, pre and probiotics, macronutrients that come from healthy sources, in other words, sources that include all of the above, and micronutrients from healthy sources, or sources that include all of the above. And the thing that really jumps off the page at you when you look at this list is that these are compounds that are found pretty much exclusively or predominantly in whole plant foods. Then when you consider pathogenic factors like trans fatty acids and excessive saturated fat, refined carbohydrates, excessive sodium, new 5-GC, which is a pro-inflammatory molecule in meat, chemical contaminants, products of high temperature cooking, pro-oxidants, TMAO or trimethylamine N-oxide, and endotoxins. These are dietary components that are concentrated in highly processed foods and animal products. The sad reality, SAD standing for the Standard American Diet, is that much of what consumers eat is a threat to health. And the bottom line is we know enough. We know enough to make lifestyle medicine our first line of treatment for type 2 diabetes. And so the rest of this presentation, I want to focus on the dietary protocol, 10 steps to optimizing plant-based diets for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And our dietary goal is very simple. We're aiming for remission. Step number 1 is to achieve and maintain a healthy body weight. And I know that's easier said than done, but it is extremely important because restoration of a healthy body weight is directly associated with diabetes remission. Even a modest weight loss of 5 to 10% of initial body weight can improve insulin sensitivity and glycemic control, although this isn't generally sufficient for remission. If you are familiar with the DIRECT trial, you'll know that at 12 months, diabetes remission was reported in almost half of the participants in the intervention group, 46% to be exact, and 4% or only 4% of the participants in the control group. But what's really interesting about this trial is remission rates were directly correlated with weight loss. So people that we had a remission of 86% in people that lost at least 15 kilograms or 33 pounds or more, 57% remission in those that lost 10 to 15 kilos, 34% in those that lost 5 to 10, and just 7% in those that lost 0 to 11 kilograms. This is pretty impressive. But what diet is really best for weight loss? Well, any diet that provides a caloric deficit can produce weight loss. But the diet that is best for weight loss is one that also decreases morbidity and mortality, supplies adequate nutrients, and is accessible, sustainable, and culturally appropriate. The most effective approaches to energy restriction are fasting or modified fasting. I think one of the easiest and most reliable steps is time restricted feeding. So this means that you're limiting the daily period of food intake. Maybe you stop eating at 6 o'clock at night and you don't stop till 9 o'clock in the morning the next day, for example. Intermittent fasting has also been found to be effective. That's restricting energy for 2 or 3 days a week or on alternate days. But people do need to be conscious that it may not be suitable for everyone. Medical supervision may be required, especially for those on insulin or diabetes medications. Continuous energy restriction, like diets that reduce overall energy intake, such as a whole food plant-based diet, or using lower, very low-calorie diets, which again may require supervision, especially in the case of people who are taking medications. And then we have reduced meal frequency. Eating 2 meals a day has been found to be more effective than eating the same number of calories in 6 meals a day. And finally, modified timing of meals. For example, not eating 2 to 3 hours before bedtime can help improve obesity and metabolic risk. So practical pointers here. We want to eat less calorically dense foods, and the most calorically dense foods are oils and highly processed foods, deep fried foods, much more concentrated in calories per gram of food. Whole plant-based foods are much lower, which essentially means you get to eat a lot more food for a lot fewer calories, and that's something that can be very helpful for weight loss. We want to practice portion control even when we're eating healthy foods. So when we're eating concentrated carbohydrate sources like grains, starchy vegetables, and dried fruits, we need to moderate our portions often. And concentrated fat sources as well can be very concentrated sources of calories. So things like nuts and seeds and avocados and coconut and olives and so forth. We want to drink water, not sugar, and avoid snacking, aiming for at least 4 to 6 hours between meals, drinking water or herbal tea between meals, and if snacks are consumed, sticking mainly to raw vegetables or fresh fruits. Number 2 is to make whole plant foods the source of carbohydrates in the diet. Carbohydrates, contrary to popular opinion, are not the enemy. Carbohydrates from whole foods are consistently protective to human health. When we look at the evidence on carbohydrates and diabetes risk, what we see is the percent of calories from carbohydrates has little influence on diabetes risk. In fact, the lowest rates of diabetes in the world are found in populations eating relatively high carbohydrate diets. The issue is more the quality of carbohydrates. That's what determines our health outcomes. Quality is a function of the source of carbohydrates, the degree of processing of the food, and the glycemic response to the food. Poor quality carbohydrates are essentially refined carbohydrates. They increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and its complications. So what are refined carbohydrates? Well, refined carbohydrates are essentially high carbohydrate foods that have been stripped of their nutrients by food processing techniques. So there are 2 categories of refined carbohydrates: refined sugars like syrups, jams, jelly, sweet beverages, candies, and so forth, and refined starches. And refined starches include things like white flour products, white rice, and concentrated starches. The problem is, in our culture, most of the carbohydrates people eat are refined, and therein lies the reason why carbohydrates have such a bad reputation. It's because most of the carbohydrates we eat are refined and not healthy. So what is a safe level of added sugars? Well, as close to 0 as possible. The recommended intakes by the World Health Organization are not more than 5% of calories from added sugars for, sort of the greatest health benefits. That's 6 teaspoons of sugar in a 2,000 calorie diet per day. How much sugar do we get from food? Well, you can see here that just 1 portion of something like a soda or flavored coffee or a cup of yogurt or a cinnamon bun can provide close to double that 6 teaspoons, somewhere, 9 to 12 in many of these foods. And even foods that we don't think of as real sources of added sugars, like energy bars and things like barbecue sauce and instant oatmeal, other sauces, can actually get pretty close to that. And it's important to recognize that on a food label, 4 grams of sugar equals about a teaspoon of sugar. Or very close to half of the sugars in the US diet come from sweet beverages. So if we do nothing else but get rid of sweet beverages, we'll cut our intake of added sugars very significantly. Almost a third come from sweets and snacks. And we know that sugar-sweetened beverages are associated with type 2 diabetes risk. There was meta-analysis of 10 studies, over 25,000 type 2 diabetes cases, and they found that each 8-ounce serving of sugar-sweetened beverages increased the risk of type 2 diabetes by 21%. And refined grains is a similar story. When you take a kernel of wheat and turn it into white flour, you're essentially eliminating 2 of the 3 components in that wheat. You're removing the bran, which is the fiber-rich outer layer, and the germ, which is the nutrient-dense core. And what you're left with is endosperm. And in the process of producing the white flour, you lose 80 to 90% of the fiber, 70 to 80% of the vitamins and minerals, and about 95% of the protective phytochemicals that were originally in that whole wheat. And of course, nobody eats a bowl of white flour. Before you eat the white flour, we tend to add fat and sugar and salt and food additives, and then we eat the white flour. And therein lies the problem. Not only are we removing most of what is of value in the wheat, we're adding a bunch of components that we know are associated with increased risk of disease. If we look at the evidence on refined starches and type 2 diabetes risk, comparing the highest versus lowest quintiles of intake, refined starches were associated with a 23% increased type 2 diabetes risk in the study named below. High quality carbohydrates, on the other hand, are unprocessed or minimally processed carbohydrates that contain fiber and antioxidants and phytochemicals and a host of micronutrients. Things like vegetables and fruits and legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds are sources of high quality carbohydrates. And high quality carbohydrates have proven protection. In a study of over 70,000 women, again comparing extreme quintiles of consumption, unrefined fiber-rich carbohydrate was associated with a 20% decreased risk of type 2 diabetes. And when we look at evidence on whole grains and type 2 diabetes risk, there was a 2016 meta-analysis of 45 studies that reported reduced risk per 90 grams or 3 ounces of whole grain intake per day. It reduced all-cause mortality by 17%, reduced diabetes mortality by 51%. Practical pointers: carbohydrates need to come from high fiber whole plant foods. We want to avoid added sugars, especially in beverages, and minimize all refined carbohydrates, both starches and sugars. Number 3 is to bulk up on fiber. Fiber intake reduces type 2 diabetes risk. Meeting the adequate intakes for fiber, which are greater than or equal to 14 grams per 1,000 calories, was associated with a 20 to 30% reduced risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And there was one meta-analysis of 17 studies that reported a 6% decrease in type 2 diabetes risk for every 2 grams of fiber consumed. Unbelievable. So how does fiber afford protection? Well, it promotes a healthy gut microflora. It helps regulate appetite and promote weight loss. It controls blood glucose and improves insulin sensitivity. And it may help to reduce inflammation. It reduces risk of cardiovascular disease, colorectal cancer, and overall mortality as well. Recommended intakes in the United States and Canada are 14 grams or more per 1,000 calories, or an average of about 25 grams a day for women, 38 for men. Actual intakes are about 16 grams per day. High fiber intakes of at least 20 grams per 1,000 calories per day, with at least 1/3 of that fiber coming from viscous soluble fiber, improves glycemic control and blood lipids. And pioneer James Anderson achieved excellent results using actually 35 to 40 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories in his studies, and he achieved a lot of remission with that level of fiber intake. Fibers also is often divided into two categories: the sort of insoluble, non-viscous, non-fermentable fiber, the soluble, viscous, fermentable fiber, and those categories aren't that clear cut. There's some variation in that, but generally the insoluble fiber reduces diabetes risk, whereas the soluble fiber tends to improve glycemic control. And if we look at fiber content of foods, legumes are by far have the highest concentration of fiber. Just a cup of cooked legumes provides 10 to 20 grams. Avocados, grains, and berries are also great sources of fiber. And then, of course, followed by vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds as well. Of course, only plant foods contain fiber. Low fiber foods include refined carbohydrates, fast food, and highly processed foods. And no fiber foods include meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy products, fat, oil, and sugar. Practical pointers here include a variety of high fiber foods, include foods rich in soluble fiber, and select unprocessed legumes and or grains at every meal. Number 4, we want to enhance gut flora. We know a lot about type 2 diabetes and the gut microbiome. Dysbiosis, or an unhealthy gut microflora, is associated with both development and progression of type 2 diabetes. An unhealthy gut microbiota contributes to increased gut permeability, low-level inflammation, visceral fat accumulation, insulin resistance, and metabolic endotoxemia. Diet determines the health of the gut microbiome. Western diets are associated with changes in the gut microbiota that fuel obesity and metabolic disease. High fiber, whole food, plant-based diets feed friendly microbes and support a healthy gut microflora. And practical pointers here to improve gut flora: we want to eat more prebiotics, and prebiotics are those fermentable fibers from whole plant foods. We want to eat food-based probiotics like cultured and fermented foods. We want to minimize our intake of foods associated with dysbiosis, highly processed foods, fried foods, and meat. And we want to avoid artificial sweeteners and excessive alcohol consumption. Number 5, aim for a low glycemic load. And there's convincing evidence from meta-analyses that low GI-GL diets reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes, improve glycemic control, and they improve insulin sensitivity and beta cell function in people with type 2 diabetes. They also improve blood lipids and inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein, and reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. Quantifying the impact has been accomplished in meta-analysis of 24 studies. They reported that the risk of type 2 diabetes rose 27% for every 10 units of GI and 26% for every 80 grams of GL in a 2,000 calorie diet. And the authors concluded that our evidence indicates that GI and GL are substantial food markers of predicting the development of type 2 diabetes worldwide. Practical pointers here: we want to make wise GI and GL choices, emphasizing non-starchy vegetables, legumes, nuts, and seeds, all of which have a very low glycemic impact. We want to control serving sizes of starchy vegetables and grains, which can have a higher glycemic impact. And we want to select lower GI starchy vegetables and whole grains instead. So, for example, squash instead of potatoes, intact rather than ground grains, barley over some of the other grains because it has the lowest GI of all grains. And we want to include foods that are shown to reduce glycemic impact of meals, like legumes, healthy fats like avocado, nuts, and seeds, acids like lemon or lime juice or vinegars, and cinnamon and other spices shown to improve glycemic impact of meals. Number 6, we want to be picking plant sources of protein. We have a lot of information about meat intake and type 2 diabetes risk. There was a meta-analysis of 28 articles that found that the risk of type 2 diabetes was increased 31% for every 3.5 ounce serving of red meat consumed, and 46% for every 1.75 ounces of processed meat consumed. In this study, there was no significant association for poultry or fish. There's another study that looked at over 6,000 individuals, and at 18 years of follow-up, they found that people eating more than 20% of calories from protein, who were 50 to 65 years of age, their risk of type 2 diabetes was increased over almost 4 times. And in those 65 years, the risk of type 2 diabetes was increased over 10 times. Associations with the protein and type 2 diabetes, however, were absolutely abolished or greatly attenuated when the protein came from plants. And if we look at studies on legumes and type 2 diabetes risk, this particular study in almost 65,000 women, total legume intake, highest versus lowest quintile, was associated with a 38% risk reduction. And soybeans, highest versus lowest quintile, was associated with a 47% risk reduction. So why do legumes have an advantage over meat where diabetes is concerned? Well, if you think about the protective components in foods, the fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and prebiotics and sterols and stanols, they're all either high or very high in legumes, and they're all either zero or low in meat. And if we look at the components in the diet that we know to be pathogenic or potentially harmful, things like trans fatty acids and saturated fat and heme iron and new 5GC and chemical contaminants, endotoxins, and so on, they're either low or zero in legumes, whereas they are moderate to high in meat. Practical pointers here, we want to get our protein from plants and include whole legumes at least once a day. We want to include minimally processed soy products like tofu, tempeh, and unsweetened soy milk, eat moderate amounts of nuts and seeds, and if used, select highly processed veggie meats less often. Number 7 is to get fat from whole plant foods and include sufficient omega-3 fatty acid sources. With fat, it's no different than it is with protein or carbohydrates. The quality of fat appears to be more critical than the percent of energy from fat, where both risk and progression of diabetes are concerned. And trans fatty acids and saturated fats from meat have adverse effects on fasting plasma glucose and insulin sensitivity, whereas unsaturated fatty acids improve insulin sensitivity. Oxidized fats are not good news. So exposing fatty acids to high temperatures like frying or grilling promotes the formation of harmful products of oxidation. And oxidative stress increases the risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes. The most healthful fats come from high-fat whole plant foods that are rich in unsaturated fats. And they also come with a myriad of protective dietary components like fiber, phytochemicals, and plant sterols and stanols and so forth. One study actually found when fully adjusted, type 2 diabetes risk was cut in half in those consuming 4 or more servings of nuts a week compared to those consuming less than 1 serving of nuts a week. And we need to optimize omega-3s, ensuring sufficient ALA, about 2 to 4 grams a day is what I would recommend, and include a direct source of EPA, DHA, which are, of course, the more biologically active forms of omega-3 fatty acid. So in terms of the ALA, we can get that 2 to 4 by consuming an ounce of nuts. We get about 1.8 in a tablespoon of chia seeds, 1.6 in a tablespoon of ground flax, 1 in a tablespoon of hemp seeds. Leafy greens, about half their fat is omega-3, but they're not very high in fat, so they don't have a lot. So it's less than 0.1 of a gram per cup. We might want to consider an additional source of EPA DHA because type 2 diabetes can negatively affect the desaturase enzymes responsible for converting ALA to EPA and DHA. And EPA and DHA have been associated with hypolipemic and anti-inflammatory effects and a small reduction in A1C. Fish is the primary dietary source, but fish is also a notable source of contaminants that can negatively impact diabetes outcomes, like mercury, for example. Microalgae-based EPA is a safer plant-based option for those that prefer to avoid fish. Practical pointers here: be picky about fat. Get fat from whole plant foods, minimize saturated fat, especially from meat, avoid highly processed foods with added fat, avoid fried foods, minimize concentrated fats and oils, and include reliable sources of omega-3s. Number 8 is to maximize phytochemicals and antioxidants. The most antioxidant and phytochemical rich foods are plant foods like vegetables, fruits, berries, legumes, grains, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices, sprouts, fermented foods, and green and other herb teas. Phytochemicals and antioxidants protect against diabetes and enhance dietary treatment. And the main mechanisms of actions are that some have been shown to reduce oxidative stress and inflammation. Some, especially polyphenolic compounds, enhance gut microbiota. They can improve fasting glucose and insulin sensitivity and stimulate insulin secretion. They can also help to activate insulin receptors and promote insulin signaling. Vegetables, fruits, and type 2 diabetes risk. We have a meta-analysis of 10 studies that showed for each serving, risk of type 2 diabetes was reduced by 13% for green leafy vegetables, 10% for other vegetables, and 7% for fruits. Practical pointers here: think variety when it comes to plant foods. The wider the range of vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds in the diet, the greater the variety and content of phytochemicals and antioxidants. Think color. The richest sources are often the most colorful, so we might want to pick purple instead of white onions, dark instead of light greens, black instead of brown rice, red or black legumes instead of white, and eat more raw foods, because raw foods contain certain enzymes that help convert phytochemicals into their active forms or their bioactive metabolites, like myrosinase in cruciferous vegetables, which can help convert glucosinolates to isothiocyanates like sulforaphane, and the allanase in allium vegetables that helps to convert allan to allicin. We might want to consume more sprouts. The phytochemical army, poised to protect the delicate new plant when you sprout, multiplies by about 5 to 50 times, and so you can get a real boost in phytochemicals with sprouts. Pile on the herbs and spices. Herbs and spices, gram for gram, actually are more concentrated in phytochemicals and antioxidants than any other food. We might also want to select the more antioxidant-rich teas like hibiscus and green tea and matcha tea and so forth. Number 9 is to minimize dietary contaminants, the worst offenders being environmental contaminants and the byproducts of high-temperature cooking. Now, environmental contaminants include things like pesticides in conventional produce, heavy metals like mercury in fish and seafood, and arsenic in rice, chicken, fish, and seaweed, and persistent organic pollutants like PCBs, DDT, and dioxins that move up the food chain, so are more concentrated in fish, meat, and dairy products. These compounds can increase oxidative stress, they can fuel inflammation, disrupt hormones, damage vital organs, including pancreatic beta cells. They damage DNA in the central nervous system as well. And solutions here are to choose organic when you can, to eat lower on the food chain, and to vary our grains. Inorganic arsenic can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And rice is one of the more concentrated sources. So we may, just by varying grains and not eating as much rice, this can be helpful. We can also carefully select rice. Rice from certain areas like California is lower than in some of the southeastern states. The other thing we can do is cook rice in a lot of water, like pasta. So you might cook it in 10 times as much water as rice, and then just drain it, and you can get rid of 80 or 85% of the arsenic by doing that. Products of high temperature cooking like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and advanced glycation end products can be also limited in the diet. We know that meat cooking can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. There was a study of over 138,000 individuals that showed that open flame and or high temperature cooking more than 15 times a month, or every second day essentially, versus less than 4 times a month, was associated with a 28% increased diabetes risk. Now, heterocyclic amines are known carcinogens, but they're also associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, and they form in meat, poultry, fish, and eggs when those foods are cooked at high temperatures. They're not formed in plant foods because you need creatine or creatinine to form heterocyclic amines, and those amino acids are not present in plants. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are known mutagens. They're linked to lung, skin, and genitourinary cancers. They're positively associated with type 2 diabetes, and they're present in any charred food. So blackened foods are all sources of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, are associated with prediabetes, diabetes, and the complications of diabetes. AGEs contribute to insulin resistance, and the most concentrated sources are bacon, broiled or grilled or processed meat, poultry or fish, other grilled or broiled foods, dark roasted nuts and seeds. And the solutions here are to avoid charred or blackened foods, especially meat, poultry, or fish. Avoid fried foods, especially deep fried foods, and use more moist methods of cooking, like steaming, stewing, boiling, water sauteing. They produce fewer products of oxidation. And eat more raw foods, because they're the very lowest in these products of oxidation. And finally, number 10, you need to ensure micronutrient needs are met. People with diabetes often have micronutrient deficiencies, and choosing more nutrient-dense foods like vegetables and legumes helps to ensure adequate nutrients when calories are restricted. This is really important. Micronutrients of concern for people with diabetes are vitamin B12, vitamin D, potassium, magnesium, chromium, and all of the antioxidant nutrients like provitamin A, carotenoids, vitamin C, and vitamin E. People eating varied whole food plant-based diets generally consume plenty of these nutrients, with the exception of vitamins B12 and vitamin D. Now, vitamin B12, plant foods just are not reliable sources of B12 unless they're fortified. Metformin, for people taking metformin, reduces B12 absorption as well. So we want to aim for at least 1,000 micrograms of B12 2 or 3 times per week. And for those 65 plus or who are on metformin, we would recommend 500 to 1,000 micrograms per day. Vitamin D, most people don't get enough vitamin D from sunshine. Plant-based diets actually offer fewer food sources of vitamin D than omnivorous diets. So what's often recommended is 1,000 to 2,000. This is a typo here. I can see it says 20,000, but it should say 2,000 IUs a day or more, as directed by your healthcare provider. Some people need 3,000 or 4,000 to get vitamin D levels where they need to be. And finally, in summary, what should people eat? Well, I would suggest non-starchy vegetables and fruits, about 9 or more servings per day. We want to go for variety and color. Make dark greens a daily staple. Include berries in the mix. Legumes, 2 or more servings a day. And we want to include at least 1 serving as whole legumes, beans or lentils every day. Feature legumes at most meals. Whole grains and starchy vegetables, 2 or more a day, depending on energy needs. So if we're controlling weight, we'll be going lower than if weight loss goals have already been achieved. And we want to keep grains mostly intact. All whole grains are not created equal. A granola bar doesn't equal a bowl of oatmeal, and a box of Kamut flakes does not equal a Kamut berry salad. There is a hierarchy of whole grains, and at the top of that hierarchy are intact whole grains. Nothing harmful added, nothing healthful removed. They are pretty much as they're picked off the plant. Next on the hierarchy are cut whole grains like steel-cut oats, then rolled whole grains like rolled oats, then shredded whole grains like shredded wheat, then ground whole grains like whole wheat flour products, then flaked whole grains like whole grain flaked cereals, and then puffed whole grains like puffed wheat or puffed brown rice or puffed millet. And as you go down the hierarchy, you're increasing the surface area of the food, you're increasing the glycemic index, and you're decreasing the nutrients because you've exposed the food to food processing. And so for people who are trying to put diabetes into remission, you want to stay close to the top of this hierarchy as much as possible. Select colorful starchy vegetables prepared without added fat. And for nuts and seeds, at least a serving a day. And you want to include variety here. You want to ensure sources that are rich in omega-3s like chia, flax, and hemp seeds or walnuts. But the interesting thing about nuts and seeds are each have sort of unique nutrition profile, and so they stand out as, for example, vitamin E, almonds and sunflower seeds, zinc, cashews, and all seeds. But different nuts and seeds have different nutritional benefits, so you want to include a mix. You want to keep portions moderate because most nuts and seeds contain 600 to 800 calories per cup. So for weight loss, you can't be eating too many. And then you want to include one or more omega-3 rich choices. Herbs and spices, just use them generously. Incorporate them at every meal, expand your variety, add ethnic options here. And use herbs and spices that are known to help fight type 2 diabetes and moderate blood glucose levels. Like we talked about cinnamon, but there are many others as well. Be stingy with salt. High sodium intake is strongly associated with hypertension and cardiovascular disease risk in people with type 2 diabetes. So take-home message here is every time you eat or drink, you either fight type 2 diabetes or you feed type 2 diabetes. Whole plant food diets are among the most powerful tools for driving type 2 diabetes into remission. And I would like to end my presentation by sharing a short story about my dad. My dad was not exactly a health nut. And when I started to study in dietetics, and this is more than 40 years ago, I can remember being home on a study break, and my dad was teasing me. He walked by me with his belly sticking out as far as he could. He had 2 cigarettes hanging out of his mouth, a bag of potato chips and licorice all sorts under one arm, bottle of Coke under the other. And he turned to me with his cheeky grin and just slowly sauntered by. And I gave him this look of disgust. But a couple of hours later, I went to him and I said, "I don't get it, Dad. Why are you trying to kill yourself? We want you to live for a long time. You need to stop doing this." And he said to me, he said, "I'd sooner live 50 years having the freedom to enjoy everything I enjoy than live 75 having to restrict this and restrict that." He said, "I could get hit by a truck tomorrow." And I responded, "I know, Dad, but it doesn't mean you have to walk out in front of one." And it wasn't probably 2 or 3 years after that interaction that my dad had a stroke at work. And he was brought to the hospital. His blood pressure was 220/110. His blood sugar was 550 milligrams per deciliter. And he had severe coronary artery disease. His doctor told him that if he didn't stop smoking, he'd probably live only a few months. And if he did, he might live 3 years. And they ended up putting grafts below his heart into both his legs and putting him on insulin and of course all of the other hypertension medications and so on. And my dad did make some changes. He stopped smoking and he traded his bacon and eggs for oatmeal and blueberries with ground flax sprinkled on top. And he started eating more beans and vegetables. And happy I can, I just so clearly remember sitting on my dad's bedside and him when he got this diagnosis, and we were both in tears. And I can remember my dad saying to me, "I don't want to die." I think it was at that point he realized that, life is more precious than potato chips. And he also realized that without his health, he didn't have freedom at all. Freedom very quickly is snatched away when health is snatched away. And, so he made all of these changes. And I remember him also saying, I want to be alive to watch my grandkids grow up. I want to dance with my sweetheart, my sweetheart at our 50th anniversary. And I'm happy to say that my dad lived about 30 years after this diagnosis. And he did watch his grandchildren grow up. My daughter behind there with the red circle around her face, and he did dance with his sweetheart on their 50th wedding anniversary. We're very grateful for that. These are two of my diabetes books, and I will say thank you, and I'm not sure if I have a little bit of time for questions. I will stop my share. And let's see. Is my share stopped?
Close out the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Where's your PowerPoint?
There.
There we go. Awesome. Wow. That was a lot to digest. No intended.
I tend to stuff as much as I can into my presentations.
Phenomenal. You also have a new book coming out, don't you, about protein?
Yes, I do. Plant-powered protein, it's called. I just received it this week in the mail.
Ah, lovely. Lovely.
So that's my 13th book, actually.
That's lovely. So trying to go back here. Let's see. Mission have to weigh less. What is the effect of a whole food plant-based diet on a person with diabetes? I think DM is diabetes mellitus, right? 2 on dialysis with limb loss. Any data or studies in that? Any chance of remission?
On a person who's already on dialysis?
Yeah.
I would refer you to, for CKD or chronic kidney disease, there's Dr. Joshi, Joshi, I believe, Shivan Joshi, who is an expert in the use of plant-based diets and kidney disease. And in fact, we have some really good evidence that using plant-based diets in kidney disease reduces morbidity and mortality for people who have kidney disease. So it is absolutely possible to use a whole food plant-based diet for those individuals. Now, whether or not we can reverse, kidney disease at that stage when they're already on dialysis, there's not great evidence in that regard. But I am hoping that we'll be, getting some studies looking at that in time. But certainly we know that it can be very successfully done, and we can reduce, when I worked with Carlos, he was in early renal failure, and we were able to completely reverse that, but he was not yet on dialysis.
Awesome. I think that someone had asked, are your books available on Amazon?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, the diabetes books have many of my favorite go-to everyday recipes, and they were, tested. We got them all to 5 stars with our recipe testers. So they really are wonderful recipes.
That's fantastic.
And of course, it's not just recipes. We have a cookbook, so that's recipes, and then we have Kick Diabetes Essentials. That's really the guidelines and going through all of the science and the research.
That's awesome. Anybody else have any other questions for Brenda? I'm trying to scroll down here. If beans and grains raise blood sugar, do you recommend them for diabetics?
Oh, absolutely. Because the thing is that it's not, beans and grains are loaded with protective components. They're loaded with fiber. They're our most concentrated sources of fiber. Mm-hmm. They're great sources of multiple nutrients, and they're consistently associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. And the thing that I found when I was working in the Marshall Islands, beans, we didn't have to limit at all. They're self-limiting. People can only eat so many beans. Grains, we did. We found that when we at the beginning, we did this sort of protocol where we just put out bowls of the rice or barley or whatever and let people help themselves. And we found that we didn't get the blood sugars to where they needed to be doing that. So we found that with portion control, so we would dish out a half a cup or whatever it was for specific grains and starchy vegetables. And then we had beautiful results. As I said, we had close to a third of people going into remission. So
amazing.
I've been back several times and doing interventions there, and we have had even better results. We had one intervention, we had drops of over 100 milligrams per deciliter in blood sugar in 2 weeks. So we're getting better at knowing how to do this right. And so, yes, absolutely can be part of a healthy diet, and just keep them intact. If you keep the ground grains and the puffed grains and the flake grains out, and you keep them intact, so you're eating kemet berries and wheat berries or quinoa or these intact grains, the results are so far superior.
Awesome. Brenda, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful working with you. We got to move on to Dr. Sabger's presentation next. I'm going to pop over the other room, and I'm sure we'll work together again.
You bet. Thank you very much, Richard, and thank